there is a very big focus there on retention and starting to measure that user journey and churn. And radio is an interesting one because you might get people who love our breakfast show, and they might log on every morning, Monday to Friday, between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. to listen to our breakfast show. They might go and listen to Spotify during the day at work, and then in the drive show in the afternoon, they might actually like a show from another station.
Hi, everybody. For today's episode of Retention Zone, I'm going down under to talk to Tim Armstrong. We got in touch because he wrote a comment of one of the Retention Zone videos, and I let him introduce himself, but also remind me of what the comment was, but it captured my attention. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Carlo. Yeah, good to be here, and great to be here chatting to you. My name's sort of Tim Armstrong. I am all the way down here in Australia, down under, but don't confuse that because by nature or by my growing up, I'm a Kiwi, not an Australian. So Australians and Kiwis have a very fierce rivalry down here, which we all enjoy. So I do quite like being a Kiwi living in Australia. But my sort of background, I've worked in the digital space for a long time. I'd probably call myself a digital native if I want to go there, and probably trying to venture out of that a little bit now. I've done a variety of things across my career, a lot in the digital media space around ad technology and ad operations and marketing, right through to data and technology, and spent sort of a few years, probably late 2010s, in an OTT technology business, really getting stuck into streaming when CTV and fast were really becoming a thing, and more recently spent some time in a radio business here in Australia, which is really interesting because of the things that are similar between streaming and audio, but also some of the nuances there, which probably leads to I guess my role there as director of digital capability and data, where I'm sort of look after the digital technology stack, whether that be from content, audience, monetization perspective and everything that surrounds that. But then I guess how I landed here, as you mentioned, the comment I made around distribution being King Kong, and obviously the importance of that to the ecosystem, be it streaming or be it digital audio.
So super interesting experience, and you just remind me that I was in your original country of origin, in the early 90s for a ski World Cup race close to Christchurch. It was a surreal thing. It was one of the most surreal thing I did in my life is going to New Zealand for a ski World Cup race. So good memory. Well, sorry for the interruption.
But actually what's really interesting with that is that my first job out of university was for a surf and a snow website in New Zealand, where we did all the forecasts, and we did streaming cameras from up the mountain and at the beach, made that available online. And the guy who founded the company, Scotty, he had a world record for downhill speed skiing at one point in time, which I'm sure was well into the 200s, which a little bit scary for me.
No, okay. So there are a lot of dualities that I realize I want to talk to you about. So maybe let's start with you work in streaming and in audio. So again, as I was thinking before, if I'm on the moon and I look at planet Earth, I see in that categories Netflix and Spotify. I know it's more sophisticated than that, but if you, especially with focus on monetization, etc., what are in your experience, what are the main difference between these two worlds that are somehow close? Obviously, as user, we consume at the same time sometimes, so very fluid for us. But obviously, if you work from behind the scene, it's a bit different, I guess.
Yeah, I think you can look at that from multiple perspectives, right? Is you've got your traditional TV businesses, which a lot of online video contents came off the back of, whether that being your homegrown production content, or whether that came through the various content houses. And then on the other side of it, you've got the same. You've got traditional radio businesses, or you've got music and artists. And obviously, Netflix and Spotify are the two behemoths which sit either side of that fence, and probably are a little bit different because they're not tied to a TV broadcaster or not tied to a radio broadcaster. But ultimately, I think, some of the differences is that, I would say maturity wise, the video ecosystem is a little bit more progressed than audio. I think that when we look at the video ecosystem, the type of viewing and the type of consumption is, for the most part, very different. We know that comes through that sort of linchpin device being the TV sitting in the household, sitting in the lounge room that the family like to congregate around, or the household likes to congregate around. And therefore, it's kind of a blockbuster event kind of viewing situation. On the audio side of things, it's more on the go and it's more occasion based, but it's also quite different, especially if you layer down into audio below just songs, right? So in the audio ecosystem, you've got your traditional live radio, you've got your on-demand music, and then you've got your on-demand podcasts. And whilst they're all very similar in nature, where we consume that through our ears, the difference across each of those is quite substantial in terms of what's available to us. But I think, some of the larger things that I definitely have experienced and identified is that in TV world or video world, if you thought about Netflix content, you can only go to Netflix to consume that content. There's no way you can access that content in any other aggregator platform outside of Netflix. You have to have a subscription to get into that environment, and therefore you become part of their user base. And once you do that, you obviously pay a fee, even with the ad-light model that they have as part of that. On the other side of that, Spotify is your blend of free and subscription, right? So I think in some parts, audio's got that piece a little bit more right than what video has, because I think we see video still sort of battling with TVOD, AVOD, fast, SVOD, and how we work all that out, and trying to accept and acknowledge that one of those models alone probably won't build you the critical mass that you want from an audience perspective, and build a level of dominance in a market that's very crowded, very competitive, and evolving very quickly. And then on the audio side, so Spotify has a lot of third-party content. So using our example as a radio broadcaster in Australia, we have a podcasting business. We have 400 odd titles which sit as part of that business. All of that content's available for free on Spotify. We also serve all the ads into that content as well. So I think there's probably, from an infrastructure point of view, there's a little bit more less rigor on the audio side of things, because it is a little bit more of making the audio content available where the users are. Whereas in video, it's more about bringing users to where the content is. So there are definite similarities there, where both are sort of grappling with the models of how we make that work long term, and how we get the right blend between an AVOD or an SVOD or whatever that needs to be. But it also means that from an audience point of view, there is a pretty significant difference in model that you need to implement, or viewpoint you need to take, when you're either making people come to your content, or you're making your content go to people. And I think that provides a pretty interesting transition between those two environments. And then you start to get into the audio conversation around where does podcast sit? What's that listening occasion like? Where does radio play a spot? How does that fit into evolving ecosystems like the connected car? And then how does on-demand music sort of form part of that, knowing that Spotify is so dominant in that space? And I can't remember the last time I met someone who hasn't used or doesn't use Spotify on a regular basis.
So I think what is fascinating, on one end, you're saying in your current kind of business, monetization is, I think, as for everybody, multiple revenue streams, because now the single revenue stream is not the luxury we have anymore. But there's also like the B2B component, so the ad, etc., that is clearly coming B2B, not direct to consumer, is also maybe still predominant. So that's why distribution is considered in a different way compared to a pure subscription business, I would say.
Yeah, and definitely. And I think if there's always a lot of talk in the Australian market about BVOD, and I believe that, and don't quote me on this, that I believe the term BVOD may have originated out of Australia, but I
define
don't know
it properly for everybody.
Yeah, so broadcast a video on demand, which really was what was coined off the back of the local broadcasters in Australia taking their content, putting it onto on-demand platforms, right, or onto the digital ecosystem. But the difference there with BVOD in particular is that, yeah, if I'm a Channel 9 in Australia, every piece of content that I generate is only available in my BVOD platform, which is 9 Now. And as a user, the only way that I can access that content, even though it's free, it's ad funded, is I need to sign up and register. So I need to hand over my email address and my name and a few other pieces of information to help them identify me, which, we know that Australia is going through a pretty significant regulatory change at the moment, or proposed regulatory change, which is similar to what Europe did years back with GDPR. And then even all of that content in that environment is all very much, it's heavily locked down. It's got DRM on it, so digital rights management. All of those streams are encrypted. You can't take it and put it anywhere else. So you've got to go to that environment to get it, and then once it's there, you can't take it anywhere else. If I then thought about what our ecosystem looks like from an audio point of view, is podcasting in particular, a very, very large percent of all podcasting consumption happens on either Spotify, Apple, or Google. Now, because of the breadth of content that any one publisher has, you could never expect someone to come solely to Nova Entertainment to find parenting podcasts. We'd have one or two which might fit what you need or what you're looking for. But ultimately, it comes back to this whole concept around discovery, right? And if we think about a lot of the conversation in CTV, it's discovery. How do we
universal search?
Discovery?
Universal search.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think audio's got that a little bit better because Spotify, as an example, brings a critical mass of people, a critical mass of audience, which means goes back to that point I made around King Kong and distribution, is because all the people are there. So you put your content there, and then they'll consume that content, or they'll go and find 20 parenting podcasts, and then they'll pick the one that best fits them, because podcasting is a little bit more tailored or a little bit more conducive to personal taste. Do you like the host? Do you like the style of the content? Do you like the tone of it? Do you like the guests? All of that kind of stuff. But it means that, we still monetize all the content that gets consumed on Spotify. But if you think about addressability, targeted advertising, those things are significantly inhibited because of the fact that those environments, whilst they'll allow our content to be consumed there, we can serve ads into that content. The data that we get back is not very rich. It's very aggregated. It's not personalized. And it means
that was my next question. So it's great that you can distribute everywhere, but what you get back, and also how can you harmonize all this amount of content that is consumed? I think that's pretty complex compared to obviously your own and operated OTT, right?
It is, right. And if you think about, some of the things that we find are demanded more than anything else from advertisers and agency groups is around first-party data. I want explicit one-to-one targeting. I want hyper-personalization, and all of that stuff's great. And I think that in the audio space, we'd love to be able to provide that, and we do that as best we can with what we have. But the reality is we end up, we become a little bit immune to things like, let's say, the cookie apocalypse, with third-party cookies going away because they're not really that relevant for us. We lean very heavily on context and the environment in which it's being consumed. And it means that we cannot be pure play from a first-party data point of view. We have a sample of first-party data from the content that is consumed on our platforms, but that's a percentage of total consumption. And we then have to lean on sophisticated, lookalike machine learning models to try and radiate levels of commonality across our network to try and bundle groups of listening or groups of content together to help present back to the advertiser an audience or a profile of people to try and reach or meet a brief from a targeting point of view. And that's good for us because I think it means we're a bit ahead of some of the other larger media businesses in Australia who do other mediums, because things like regulatory change don't impact us as much because the volume of first-party data we have is significantly smaller and always will be. But it also means that things like programmatic are probably a little bit slower to build in scale because people are so used to those first-party signals to drive that. So I think it's challenging, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in it, especially as we start to move to a more privacy safe world, and a world where some of those data signals are starting to really disappear and force us to
it's like you're leveling a bit the market, right? And one thing that I want to understand is in this world, does retention make sense in terms of you have I'm sure it makes sense in general. So if people are leaving your content, you're not happy, but so churn is a bit is defined in a different way. Maybe is only quantity, or you have some qualitative aspects in what you do in terms of churn and retention.
For a lot of, we look at our business in three parts. We look at it as an all of audio business because we're sort of not so worried anymore about where our content is consumed. It's more about that people are consuming our content. And we have the radio broadcast component, which is one of those pillars, which is very much heavily reliant on a diary based system for measurement, which TV did the same, and many other mediums have that kind of measurement mechanism, and that's evolving. We stepped into a really new, exciting period of that last year with what we call GFK 360 here, where we now incorporate digital data into that diary system, and we actually have personal so PPMs, which are the devices that measure, whether it's a watch or an application on the phone that measures the sound in the background, and then gives us a read on, perceptibility of audio and whether that someone was listening to the radio or not. Then on the live streaming side of things, we've obviously got a lot of digital data there as well. So those surveys in the combination with that digital data gives us sort of view of listenership. Some of that deterministic, some of that through the diary system. And then we sort of take that and start to build out models on what that looks like throughout the broader business. So acquisition is always really important to us. Like anything, we always want to grow our audience, and with more and more digital-based measurement, we're getting more and more clarity around that growth. We're always very interested in trying to deduplicate, who's listening to just broadcast, who's listening to just digital, who's listening to both. And then on the retention front, especially with the work that my team has done from re-architecting our customer ecosystem within the business, there is a very big focus there on retention and starting to measure that user journey and churn. And radio is an interesting one because you might get people who love our breakfast show, and they might log on every morning, Monday to Friday, between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. to listen to our breakfast show. They might go and listen to Spotify during the day at work, and then in the drive show in the afternoon, they might actually like a show from another station.
It's very habit-based radio. You're right.
And then I think the power of that is the emotive and human connection that the talent have on those shows with the listener. So we do measure both acquisition and retention. We've done a lot of work in the last couple of years around trying to increase the rate of listening. So, how can we get someone who's come into the network who's listening twice a month to then listen 4 times a month to then listen 6 times a month? And how do we profile all of those audiences like that? But it just, again, comes back to that point where there is only a percentage of our digital audience that we have that data coverage on, and we end up extrapolating that out across the rest. So it becomes a scenario of us trying to do the best we can with what we've got based on the limitations that exist within the ecosystem. And the interesting about that is that I'm finding that there are not a lot of people who can operate in that kind of ambiguous mode where you're having to make decisions, you're having to make assumptions, and you're having to kind of put your neck out a little bit and back a position or a viewpoint on something where you might have a fraction of the data that you would like to have, but that's probably as much data as you're going to have to make that decision or form that position.
Yeah, I think on one end, you're possibly the people, I mean, in general, with you take care a lot about your data because you don't have a lot, and you try to use AI in a realistic way to really drive decision, more than people that maybe on the other side are spoiled, but having too much data, not using it properly, and using AI a bit with as a, sorry, I don't want to talk badly about the other, but so you're really serious about the data you have and how you use AI to extract, in the end, decision-making insights, right?
Yeah, and it's been, I would say that sort of one of my very, candid observations or experiences from my time at Nova, from when I started there to now, was through the change in the business that's happened, in terms of acceptance and acknowledgement around the opportunity that digital provides us as a business. But definitely from the start. I remember one of my first sort of couple of meetings where we were talking about doing ad replacement. So similar to what you do with streaming, where you take the broadcast ads out and you replace them with digital. And there was one particular person within the business who was very fixated on the fact that that ad replacement, because the way it works for audio is very similar to streaming, but slightly different, because we can do partial ad replacement, not full ad replacement as a mandatory piece. And they were very adamant that they ad replacement, because we were doing it based on geo boundaries, that it had to be 100% accurate. And they said, if I can't, if I step 1 meter this way, I need to make sure that you're not doing ad replacement. And we kind of turn around and say, well, your sample size for radio surveys was about, I think 17.5 to 20,000 people, across a 10 million plus listening base in Australia, and you want 100% accuracy for digital. That's
I saw the different ways. I've been there for many years.
It's a great ambition, but I don't know how many people and how many dollars you need to try and get digital to be 100% accurate like that. I think it's just I always joke about the fact that we're trying to build things which are just good enough in a world that's very imperfect.
Yeah, absolutely. What a perfect ending, to be honest. No, I like that you somehow went through, I mean, in the reality of things, through this kind of transformation that, as always, takes time. Because if you think when you started and where we are now, and I'm comparing it to AI now, that AI will change. I hate when people say will change forever, blah blah blah. I'm using it a lot. We need to be realistic. It will take years before things will be very different. I think we are like when iPhone was out without an app store, right? Was it really transformational? No, because it had few things. Did it then change that transformation? Did it change our lives? Yes, but it took years. So that's where I am in terms of AI and data and digital in general.
Yeah, AI is it can be a really difficult one at times, because what it can do longer term is it's endless. The possibilities are endless, and it's really exciting about how that can change our lives. But it's really important for us, I think, to try and also balance the optimism of people who haven't been that interested in technology, who are excited by it, with the fact that there is actually quite a bit of stuff we need to do to make sure we get things in the right place to use AI. And I did see a good meme yesterday about AI. AI is a great solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, like many times in technology, to be honest.
Yeah,
Va bene. Thank you, Tim, for taking the time and for staying up late, because to be honest, it's late where you are, right?
it is. It's what are we coming up 8:30 at night, so it's not too bad. It is Friday night as well, but yeah, no,
So
I'm very
much appreciated, even more. Thank you.
very happy to spend this time with you, Carlo. That's for sure.
Okay. Thank you, ciao, Tim.
Thanks, Carlo.